Joe Kelly is the Australian's Washington correspondent. Joe, Donald Trump says he wants to acquire Greenland either by financial means or by force for national security purposes.
This is really an extraordinary situation that we're in right now. I don't think anyone reasonably 12 months ago would have thought that we'd be right here. And essentially, Europe now not only has to contend with Russia, but really the key issue it has to contend with right now is economic coercion from an ally, and really the central plank of the NATO alliance in the form of the United States. So we're really in new territory here. And I would argue there are very compelling reasons to think that the United States under Donald Trump is really unpicking the foundations of that post World War II international order.
But is this actually a good deal?
The short answer is no, Kristen. I think it's a bad deal. In fact, I don't think it makes very much sense at all, whether you're talking about strategically or economically. I just think it's a bad deal. It's expensive. There's a variety of different estimates. On the high side, there are estimates over $1 trillion. On the low side, people are talking about $250 billion. But some of the estimates in the middle are about 600 billion, 700 billion, 750 billion. That's a lot of money. That's going to increase the debt. It's going to increase annual deficits. It's going to increase interest payments for the US, and it's really going to put a squeeze on average everyday Americans. And I don't think they get very much in return. They don't get very much in return because strategically, the United States doesn't need to own Greenland. Strategically, there's a defense agreement signed back in 1951. They can have bases there. It would just require them to cooperate. So I think it's a bad deal in economic terms. And worst of all, it invites retaliation from Europe, and it destroys the transatlantic partnership, which has been really so crucial in preserving stability in Europe for so long. So I think we're really on the precipice of something big, something unpredictable, and we're only 1 year in to Trump's 4 year term.
Yeah, let's talk about that possible retaliation by the European nations who could be affected by an acquisition like this. What are the options available to them here, and what could be some of the consequences if they do go down that path?
So this is going to be a really tricky decision, how Europe responds. Europe is big. There's a whole range of different countries, and they're not going to agree. Some are going to be more inclined to try and keep the US on side. Some are going to be more inclined to try and do something. So there are going to be different positions. But in terms of what options are available to them, at the moment, the EU has not yet ratified the trade deal that it struck with Donald Trump. So they can pull that ratification. That means the US doesn't get the lower tariffs that it was hoping. So that's option one. The other thing is they can put on their own retaliatory tariffs on over $100 billion worth of US goods. So that's another option before them. But one of the options that French President Emmanuel Macron has floated is the idea of this anti-coercion instrument. And this is sort of referred to as sort of the trade bazooka. And effectively that gives the EU a range of different options, more forceful export controls to put tariffs on services, restrict intellectual property rights, and a suite of other measures. Now, going one step beyond that, there is the possibility, very unlikely, this would be sort of, a nuclear option if Europe decided to do it, in offloading U.S. treasuries. Now that won't happen because that inflicts harm on Europe, but it holds an awful lot of U.S. treasuries. So the U.S. is vulnerable in that regard. The fact that we're discussing some of these options, I think, however, is extraordinary, and it shows the strain, the pressure that's being put on this transatlantic partnership, and really the fact that we're now in uncharted territory.
So, this isn't, as you said, a great deal economically. It's not strategically necessary. So, what is actually driving Donald Trump in this issue? As much as you can, try to glean what's driving Donald Trump at any given time.
I think Donald Trump has a throwback view of the world. So his view is that the post World War II order really has not worked to the advantage of America, that America has suffered, has been ripped off as a result of this system. It's carried burdens on behalf of other countries, allies, and partners, and it shouldn't have to do that. He doesn't think it's benefited the United States. He's got really a 19th century view of the world. We're going back here to the Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the United States should really worry about its piece of the globe, and the other big powers can worry about their piece of the globe. So if you look at what he's doing through that lens, things seem to make more sense. You know, the adventurism in Venezuela, the capture of Maduro, really the exercise in sort of resource colonialism in Venezuela, trying to get indefinite control over its oil sector, encouraging the big US oil companies to go in, and now this look towards Greenland. I think Trump would like to have a legacy, that he expanded the geographical territory of the United States. So he'd be looking at things like the Louisiana Purchase, back in 1803, which is sort of an enormous purchase of land on the western side of the Mississippi. And he'd be looking to carve out a legacy on that scale. And this is how he sees it being able to be realized.
You mentioned earlier that everyday Americans don't get a huge amount, if anything, out of a deal like this if it does proceed. Donald Trump, of course, campaigned on a platform of bringing manufacturing back to America, making groceries cheaper, ultimately making life easier for Americans. Are voters behind this push to acquire Greenland, and are they even aware of the possible implications for them if it does go ahead?
I think Donald Trump's in risky political territory. He campaigned on the idea of ending these sorts of foreign interventions, forever wars. And already his MAGA political constituency is fracturing. We've seen that over a range of issues, from foreign affairs to politics, but we are now seeing a range of more aggressive foreign policy decisions being made by a president who's really under pressure over his domestic agenda. People are still concerned that the cost of living hasn't come down enough. That was one of the key things that the president campaigned on in the lead up to his election in 2024. And now we're seeing a focus on Venezuela, removing dictators from power, possible strikes and interventions in Iran. He already bombed the nuclear enrichment sites last year. And now these threats over Greenland. So I think he needs to be very careful that he doesn't further lose support among his MAGA constituency, who for the most part were concerned about these sorts of foreign escapades.
Joe Kelly is the Australian's Washington correspondent. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Kristen.